Testing volume. All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to today's episode. Welcome to AcadeCon, everybody. Very nice to see you here. Yeah. We're super pumped to go ahead and be here. So we are Tabletop Journeys. I'm Josh.
I'm Lee Wanika.
And I'm Glenn.
Yeah,
and this is our first live studio audience.
It's totally true. We have done one live show before. That's up at JamesCon, but
I wasn't able to be
That's right.
there.
Yeah,
This is the first that all three of us have gotten.
We have recorded episodes
Live
in your old office.
Yeah, and that's right. We did the one in my old office.
Connecticut. Yeah. But our first time appearing live at a convention with all three of us. We are really super pumped to go ahead and be here. Glad to have all you folks out here listening. So our show is largely conversational, so the three of us are basically going to have a conversation up here. But please, if you have questions about, or you think that we're wrong, which is entirely possible, don't hesitate. Raise your hand, throw it out, let us know. And hopefully the folks listening on our YouTube channel will also be able to go ahead and they'll fire out questions and we'll be able to answer those along the line. Also, I don't see anybody listening just yet, but if there are any folks listening, actually, that's not true. There are a couple people watching. So thank you very much for tuning in.
Welcome.
Yeah.
I can't see names, but I bet I could think of a couple of them that might be on our.
You think of a couple people that are probably watching. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think we should start today's episode the way that we always do with our favorite game. Where is Glenn today?
Well, I think you know exactly where
I do know exactly
Josh,
where you are
because you're sitting to my right.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, the RV is here too, and the wife. So we came down to AcadeCon with a 4-day drive versus the easy flyers. We set out on Halloween to get down here. Oh no, we left the day before Halloween because we added that stop in Michigan to come down here. So we're staying in Cedar Creek State Campground, just southeast of Xenia, I believe is the name of the town. And yeah, it's a nice little state park. It's crazy though, because it was empty when we got here, right? And I don't know what's going on this weekend.
Yeah.
But we wanted to move sites because we couldn't see that the site was at a steep angle.
Yeah.
Everything was booked for Friday through Sunday for some reason in a closed state campground. Like the bathrooms are shut down. They've got porta potties out, but you can still rent there, but it filled up. So I don't know what's going on this weekend, but it was crazy.
Are they all at AcadeCon maybe?
They might, well, there is AcadeCon, but I think there's more than that actually.
Yeah.
I've seen, my wife started looking into it, and I think that there's a couple of weekend events going on, but I honestly think, based on some of the conversation I've heard around the campground, that there's some prime hunting around here, and that season's just opening. They're coming in for it.
I see knowing nods from the audience here. So
having spent a large amount of time in Maine, Josh actually lives there, and I grew up in upstate New York. And now that I live in Connecticut, I forget about the volume of folks that appear in areas that have good hunting. Like I forget that. Even though I grew up with it, I miss that from time to time.
Yeah. There's also a big 5K this weekend. There's crap, I hit the whole table.
We'll edit that up in post. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
The live people will never notice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we're just hoping that they're paying attention.
Right.
That's really the key. And but along those lines,
how are you, Mr. Bill? I mean, we asked Glenn. We did the first thing where where's Glenn today?
I'm doing great. It was my first time in Dayton, and I'm having a very exceptional experience. Like the staff here at the Dayton Convention Center is amazing. They're very helpful when things go wrong. They're extremely responsive and exorbitantly kind. To a person I've spoken to, smiles and kindness, and that's a great thing to say about any city in any state. If that's how your people present to newcomers, have at it, and I think that leads into kind of what we're going to be talking about today and how you present to newcomers.
Yeah. But, and the crew and staff from AcadeCon, that's right.
Oh my God. Nick Crossman's on the hell of shit.
Holy crap. Top flight.
Like, it's been just, and like a ton of people here this morning when we first showed up. Like we were looking yesterday, like, like the room that we're playing in is huge, right? There's a ton of space.
Perfect. The tables are spaced out so you can actually.
Full yesterday, looking this morning. Lunica and I showed up at like 9 o'clock this morning. Like that was like, it was way more people in there. I was like, oh no, this is like a for real. There's like a bunch of people in here. So
one of the things I've noticed having done in this year, in the new times after post pandemic, going to a lot more conventions this year than I've been to in previous years. was the fact that most conventions, they build it or set it up so that the tables are exceptionally tight. So when you're running a game at a table, you are practically on top. Glenn and I did a convention earlier this year where literally you had to be careful where you spaced your chairs, because the back of my chair, if I sat at a good distance, those in the audience can see what kind of distance I actually need. I'm talking front to back. I had to be careful because if there was somebody sitting behind me, we couldn't have two people sitting back to back. But that's how tight the tables were.
Oh my God, the noise wars back and forth because you're getting louder and louder, trying to hear your players and make sure they hear you over the people right
so
you.
And again, one of those things that we're going to get into today with today's topic, but this is perfectly spaced. Big, spacious round tables. If you needed to get 6 to 8 because you're running a game that's bigger, perfect. If you have a more intimate game, 4, perfect. It was neither too big nor too small. That's actually a very hard thing for a lot of convention goers to deal with, because they don't set that. For convention runners, it is something to consider in your setup process. But it's amazing because we ran our Star Trek. I ran a Star Trek game. There was games at every table around me, so they had them set up in line. So there's one in front of me, one behind me, and there was one to my left and to my right. And the space between them was such that I didn't hear any one thing at any other table.
Just
you could hear some murmurs around you, but your table was your isolated island of TTRPG. Awesome.
And I mean, fantastic conversation right here at the start to segue us right into what our episode topic is going to be today. Because, I mean, what better place to talk about the difference in setting up a game to run at a convention and at a convention running games?
Do you just think somebody planned that? Maybe do you think our production guy maybe said,
whoever
why don't we
our show topics is very, very smart and handsome.
And the two folks that actually go ahead and say, I like that. We'll actually jump and do it. You know, they're not too shabby either, because they're smart as whips for just recognizing that piece of brilliance.
So, Glenn, since you cracked open the nut, we'll go ahead and let you start first. So,
I usually take over the MC duties for you. I actually announce the topic.
That's totally fine.
I was not expecting that people's elbow I'd been throwing.
If you need it. So, so you opened up tonight's topic. So, talk to us about the game that you ran yesterday and how that worked, and kind of what were your thoughts about, because one of the things that we definitely wanted to touch on today is how do you plan on running games at conventions with people that you do not know and have never met before? You know, because we've said this before, that we are spoiled with our actual play content, because we know really, really, really great role players. I mean, just
most of our Patreons are among them at this point too. So
our Patreons
games together, they're pretty solid.
And the network of podcasts that we work with, you know, like Micro 19 is the Dragon
partner on the game. It's just off the
it's like absolutely. So how does that change when you are planning a session, a time boxed session, right? Because we got a scheduled block of time. We can set how long we want, but it's still a scheduled block of time when people are going to have commitments before and after, you know, that kind of thing, for people that you don't know. Like, how did you kind of tackle that problem?
Well, you kind of hit all the touch points for what's different all right there in your preamble and question. I mean, the biggest things you need to do is you need to stop and think about, what do I need to do to make this game work with a group of strangers within the time constraints, and still have a story that's interesting with character ties to it, knowing that you're not going to have a full campaign to be able to build those and build off of them. So that's a big part of what I did. I ran Monster of the Week, powered by the Apocalypse game, because I've decided to take on the PBTA games as my piece of what I'm learning new this year. We've got the Star Trek Adventures going. I'm going to do PBTA. I've been learning Lumen 2 and Savage Worlds, but I'm starting with Powered by the Apocalypse. And Monster of the Week I had to go with because I am a huge Supernatural fan, Buffy fan, Fringe fan, Grimm fan. I mean,
Angel's better.
Angel is solid, and Angel is not better. You've never even finished. You don't even want to open this can of worms with me right now. You want to break out the Scouts Honor, Scouts Honor violation that you've made on your promise to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer if I watched Angel? Because I watched all of Angel, kid.
So that's our show for today.
But at any rate, I honestly think, just based on my initial playing it, and I've been really into listening to the Crit Show, which does a Monster of the Week AP, and it's phenomenal. A group of professional theater people that are putting this on. They're already improv performers, and they're just they're just insanely good. But it gave me so much insight into how to run the game. that I've been really absorbing that material and just trying to really nail it down. But I did have to really think about it, because coming into this, I'm like, okay, each one of the playbooks comes with some specific moves that they choose from and some extra gear and options that they get. And like one of the first steps is deciding on which playbooks are going to work best for the story, because you don't want to wind up putting a pre-gen or a character class into your story setting, into your game session, that is going to have a skill set that's just crap for your adventure.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to pick that one really specialized class that's not going to apply, like a Gloomstalker going somewhere in broad daylight.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first pieces. I picked my playbooks that would go with the story I was doing. And then I went through them, and piece by piece, I looked for things that I needed to make pre-decisions on. Because Monster of the Week, you create your character at the table. So it's not like I'm going to bring complete pre-gens. So what I'm bringing is playbooks, but I'm going through and making notes on them. Like on the expert, they get a haven or a sanctum that has special features in it that they can use in game. Like if they hit the books and they have a library, it gives them +1 forward on investigative mystery rolls, as an example. So if I'm going to include an expert, it won't do me any good to send them to, Handfast, Michigan, which probably doesn't actually exist. I just randomly placed the town of Michigan.
So. Yeah.
But their haven's in St. Louis. That's just not going to help them. So I've right at the top, I wrote your haven is an RV. And then I crossed out the 2 options that wouldn't fit in an RV, the oublet and the panic room. There's just not room. But I left everything they could to make choices. But the things where it made sense for me to pre-make the choice or to line out a selectable ability that's not going to apply to this story. Because if you have a move that would be great in an ongoing campaign every few mysteries or so, but it's not going to apply to your everyday type of hunting unless I'm writing that kind of story, I want to line that move out so that Josh doesn't wind up picking it and having a move that's useless for him during the game.
Right.
That they call that removing those sand traps or those dead ends. Like anytime when you're building pre-gens or selecting pre-gens from a list of pre-gens, for example, if you're playing a 5e based high fantasy game, D&D, WotC, thank you very much. They have a nice list of pre-gens that you can get. You can go on their tool, D&D Beyond, and get a whole and do lots of pre-gens. But here's the beauty of here's the thing: there are built-in traps within some of them. Mm-hmm. And so you do have to, when you're running a game, especially one-shots at conventions and one-shots in general, but specifically at conventions for a whole host of reasons, a lot of which we're going to continue to get into, you have to be very careful about that selection. If you're doing a game that has no undead, 2 of those cleric ones that you typically come across are undead slayers.
Right.
Why? Don't put them in there. 3/4 of their abilities don't apply. That's not going to help you. And if you do need a cleric to be an option, because WotC didn't choose to provide you one, you now need to go build a different cleric, and you can use their same tools. Just build another cleric at the appropriate level that does have some things that apply. Mm-hmm. And so that's your advice is sound, Glenn, because you have to curate what's going to work, because what you don't want at your table is people feeling unsatisfied because they didn't get to do any of the things on their sheet.
If none of their cool stuff works today and everybody else has cool stuff, I mean, they're just going to sit there and feel bored and depressed.
Yep.
I just had an epiphany.
Yeah.
As opposed to me talking about all of the points. We're illustrating this point with my game, and then we'll move on and let you talk about time boxing, or Lee, when you could talk about the time boxing part or other pieces and aspects. Bouncing back to the player piece, the last piece of advice I have there is you need some character tie-ins, because these are 4 or 5 people, 6 people who've never played together before.
Yeah. Right.
Their characters don't know anybody. So write a story where the characters already know each other and give them some detail to work with.
Well, and building linked NPC, linked pre-gens. Right. That's honestly rule number 1 is make sure that, like, especially when you're dealing with, when I get into time boxing, because that's one thing that I definitely want to go ahead and talk about specifically, but that's one thing that saves so much time at the table, at a convention table.
And on the upside, empowered by the Apocalypse games, most of them have a link the characters together component in them already in character generation.
That's built into the game.
Yeah. If you're running Monster of the Week, during the introduction section, every playbook comes with a list of things that apply to them, and you choose one of those relations for every other person at the table, and they have a similar list from their playbook. So by the time you're done, everybody has a connection to every other player at the table, and it lets them start to, even as they're discussing that, it was magic at the table yesterday. I loved watching it as the players started riffing off of each other as they came up with these. And it's not just checking a box and picking the line anymore. They're telling their own story as they develop this interconnection, and that's what made the game so magic.
It really calls to mind a thing that has always been core to the way Tabletop Journeys writes and plays and does and runs games, which is collaborative world building. Powered by the Apocalypse is a very collaborative game in general. That game system really calls for it, but specifically, and Glenn ran a scenario, not the exact same scenario, I don't believe, but
you played on?
Yeah.
No, different one today.
Yeah. So for myself, my youngest son, his wife, and his youngest son.
I was going to play this exact one with you guys, but because you might have signed up for my game today, if your game didn't fill, I pivoted and ran a different story for you, so you wouldn't be playing the same thing twice.
Exactly. So, but even though the four of us have gamed together at many tables, many game systems, this was new for a couple of us in general, but we all are role players. We like to feel the connection. We want to play the character. We want to know what's going on. So that mechanic is like the collaborative world building book that we did. Our very first book was a list of collaborative world building topics available on DM's Guild.
Traveler's Guide. The title is The Traveler's Guide to Collaborative World Building. It is available on DM's Guild Copper Seller.
Yeah, it's but the key is with that is that it let us make the connections, and the way you then organize that was very cool because it wasn't necessarily me with my son. You had me connect with Nate, your son. You had Trish connect with Quentin, my son, and then that's how we did that. So kind of seeing where people are connected at your table when you sit down is very key to what Glenn's talking about.
Right.
You want people to play with the groups that they're used to, but if you want people to integrate in some ways, you may have to kind of get a read on the table. Your observation skills, your observation skills are gonna need to be kind of on point, so you can say, okay, these two kind of know each other. They're kind of good. Do they know? Does it seem like they know each other? So a little bit of conversation before you start the game or as people are looking, pay attention to that, because if it looks like they know each other, but one's going to be shut down if they're not working with that person, make that the connection that you need to do. But if it looks like they're both fine to kind of role play with new people, make that cross connection so that you can build connections at the table in general, because anything you can do to help that is going to help that overall engagement.
And I think that's one of those things too, that with Powered by the Apocalypse, the connection between individual players is so key in general to that game. You've got in other builds of Powered by the Apocalypse, I don't know if they've got this build this kind of mechanic in Monster of the Week or not, but the power dynamics between players at the table, where player X has power over me and I have power over somebody else. Like in Masks, that's one that's kind of a mechanic. In the Real Thing too, we had that kind of relationship where it's like
each time we failed in our experience, we got to come up with a connection.
Right? And a lot of it was that I had done something against your character, or I had done something to help your character. So it kind of manufactured those connections through the game front. I guess, so does Monster of the Week, first of all, kind of have that same kind of dynamic where it's like the connections between players are not necessarily complementary? Sometimes there's some strife that's kind of built into there first.
So depending on the options along those lists, there's some options like that. You can choose that somebody is your apprentice, or that you're teaching them if you're the expert or the initiate. There's different things along those lines. But one of the things that I think is important in that instance is to make sure that both parties agree, especially when you're playing with players. If there's any kind of subordinate and superior role in that relationship, both people should be on board. Because it's not like playing with your regular group where you can make sure in advance and talk to everybody and set up characters. So I crossed out some of those when I was doing my playbook maintenance to make sure I didn't wind up with an issue where someone was like, well, you're my bitch. I don't care if you like it or not. I didn't want to deal with that at my table.
So thank you, first of all, for hitting the shot that I teed up for you right off, because I wanted to go ahead and start talking about time boxing, and the thing that I was kind of wrestling with a lot when I did. So I also ran STA like you did yesterday. And you and I had a conversation kind of leading up to that game about how, you and I co-DM our Star Trek actual play. Those are normally 5
across, just to give them proper kudos here, across 2 different games. With 2 different GMs. We're running an actual play and our Patreon game in the same world.
They happen in the same universe.
Inform each other.
They
keep track of this crap. They're amazing. I just play in the actual play game. I don't deal with all of that.
We talk Star Trek a lot. We talk a lot of Star Trek.
My shelf is getting more and more Star Trek.
Yeah.
all the time. And it was already pretty deep. I mean, real deep.
So when we're talking about planning a game session for our Patreons or even for the actual play, they're like 5-hour game sessions, and they are 5-hour game sessions with people that, like, I mean, some of them we've played with for decades, right? And so we know those players very, very well, and those players know us very, very well. So planning a 5-hour game session for those crews is you got to pack a lot of meat into that pie. I mean, there is a lot that has to go into that to go ahead and make sure, because I mean, even when you think about it from kind of a logistical point of view for the podcast, we're taking those actual play episodes, those 5-hour game sessions, and condensing them down into three or four episodes. So it has to be in that 5-hour span, 4 hours of action that people will actually want to listen to, right? Like,
but our crew fits together well enough. That's not usually an option.
Right, exactly. I mean, I've made this joke before too, that like sometimes like episode 2 is a 2 Towers episode, right? Where nothing really happens and people just walk from one place to another, right?
It's a filler episode.
Exactly.
I love the 2 Towers,
important. You can't skip it.
Like,
but
that's my favorite.
It's also the 2 Towers, right?
I can't call it my favorite, but I did enjoy the film. I see a little bit more value in it than Josh does, but I do see
I go back to the book. Not just that, I enjoyed that book better than most of the other books. Like,
did you also enjoy On the Road by Kerouac?
I didn't read that one entirely. No, so probably not.
So not dive into that.
Yeah.
But where I was going with that though is that like when you're planning that much episode for those players, planning 5 hours worth of content is a lot of content. When I picked up to go ahead and do an SDA game here, it's a 4-hour block with people that I had never met before. You and I actually had the conversation. I was like, well, if it was going to be a 4-hour game with anybody, with a group that I know, I would kind of have this like 3 to 3.5 hour long ticker in my head. Like, I know that I really need to go ahead and fill 3.5 hours worth of content for 4 or 5 people that I know, right? But here I'm going to have people that potentially do not know the system very well, because SDA, while it's getting bigger and the 2D20 system by Modifius has a bunch of kind of permutations and builds and stuff out there, still not widely known. And I reached out to players ahead of time and said, how many of you have SDA experience? And some of them had played some, but not everybody had played a lot. And some people hadn't played any, right? So, so there was going to be talk of mechanics, and the people are going to be learning the mechanics through the gameplay, which thankfully 2D20 does that really well, right? Yeah. It kind of, there are logical things that can happen. You say, okay, and now we're going to talk about determination because this has happened. So let us talk about how determination is used, that kind of thing. But even kind of beyond that, I was like, the ticker in my head was not 3 to 3.5 hours for a 4-hour slot. It was more like 2 hours. Right. Because I was like, there's going to be a lot of in between talk. There's going to be a lot of kind of, we're going to have to figure out who's going to play what, how are the roles going to break out, which much like Monster of the Week, that's something that with Star Trek, the story between the characters is automatic, right? You guys are in this particular mission, you are an away team from a ship. You all serve together. You have the same boss. Your boss is saying you're going on this away mission. And that's that. Like so the background piece was very, very easy.
Yeah. And if you're like, hey boss, we need to talk. He's like, seriously,
no, I'm your XO, go.
I had that happen.
And the toughest part was kind of deciding who at the player was going to be the senior squad member as the point person, which became interesting too, because the senior squad person wound up being like an operations manager, lieutenant junior grade, and the medical officer who was a commander on the pre-gen was like, well, I'm actually the senior officer, so why am I not the point person? And the lieutenant junior grade says, because XO said so. That was it. Like, that was the explanation that was necessary. It's like, cool.
Because you're a science officer and I come from a security
security
defense strat.
So the point that I was trying to get to with time boxing though is that you've really got to be very conscious about what options you have as a storyteller and what options you take, right? When I'm crafting kind of like a single episode or a single adventure or something like that, I'm very much kind of like a web of activities kind of player, where it's like, players will they will move from encounter A to encounter B, but encounter B could be any one of 4 different things. And depending on what encounter they pick, then kind of opens up other options, right? And sometimes it kind of fans out and fans back in and that kind of thing. But, for the most part, there's a web of opportunities, including situations where it's like, there are 7 things that could happen here. Depending on how much time you need to fill, pick however many are appropriate, right? And kind of keep going through these things to kind of not kill time, but build narrative, for lack of a better phrase. Those options had to be really, really limited yesterday. Like, I did not have a lot of options, because if I wanted the opening and the end game that I knew I wanted, I could not get bogged down. I had to have a lot of off ramps in this, right? It's like, I expected them at one point, it was basically going to be like kind of dungeon crawl style because they were an away team on another ship and they had to get from one point to another.
Right. Like we were on the asteroid. And
yeah, exactly. Kind of like on the asteroid, but there were a bunch of things that you could have explored on the asteroid and you explored a lot of them. Imagine that kind of thing where it's like, okay, there are 10 rooms that they can go into. The team yesterday only went into 2 of them.
Right.
And at 2 of them with an hour and change left in my session, I was like, you know what? I need to go ahead and bring the end game in right now. And so thankfully 2D20 supports that because if any of you are familiar with the 2D20 system, right? Like I had a bunch of threat. I mean, just like a bunch of threat. It was a Cthulhu inspired STA game. So like there was a condition in place that anytime they would gain momentum, I actually gained threat instead. Right. So they got actually momentum locked, which made it a little weird. So we got to tweak that mechanic. But at the end of the day, I was able to go ahead and basically spend a bucket load of threat to go ahead and say, the scene is mine now. I'm going to tell you what's happened. And basically players, you just have to respond to what I'm about to say.
And players have that option too. If they build up enough momentum, they can take a scene change and tell the DM, the storyteller, how the scene ends in that game, which is really cool.
Yeah. And so, thankfully I kind of had that mechanic because that was very much a situation where I was like, I've got way more game planned than I'm going to be able to get to in this time frame.
Right.
So I really am going to need to go ahead and cut out an awful lot. And so having that off ramp to go ahead and say, okay, here I am. I'm only at stage 2 of 10, but I've got to get to stage 9 right now. Being conscious of that off ramp was very, very important. So
I could totally feel your pain. And I will say that I was planning or trying to plan, sorry, leave Nico 1 second, for 2.5 to 3 hours of content for a 4-hour block. But with Powered by the Apocalypse, the story's all improv. Whether or not they win or not, how it's going to end, a conclusion, I don't get to decide any of that in advance. All I've got is a group of locations that are detailed, a group of characters that are detailed, and clues that can be found in the different locations. They decide where they're going, they decide what they're investigating, and you have no idea where they're going to go.
So we'll get to your question in just a second.
So the way I work that out is I'm like, okay, so what I've got to do is not be stingy, not hold back on the little bits of information. If it's somebody who knows something, but they're kind of reluctant to reveal it because it might be self-implicating, etc., I can't have them play that close to the chest in a convention game, because if that stonewalls them on that lead and they wind up going down 3 others before they figure it out, the next thing you know, we're out of time.
Right.
So if they made successful rolls, I gave them solid information up front. They made their choices about where they went with it.
Yeah.
But the choices they made kind of led them on a path straight through the story, which was fantastic. So I ended on the perfect amount of time.
Okay.
So I hit the nail on the head by accident. Is the moral of that story.
Yeah, because my question was very much going to be, how do you take that level of openness and, I guess, chaos, for lack of a better term, and actually make sure that they get to a satisfying ending if you know that you've only got 4 hours worth of time?
So the rule of Monster of the Week, like it says it right in the book, is no matter how much they investigate, it always comes to a fight, because you got to fight something in order to solve a supernatural, right? So if I'm watching the clock, the monster can be wherever I want it. It's got a few places where it is. But if time's running low, I can have the monster appear on the scene, especially if somebody rolls something terrible and winds up with this consequence, like you draw immediate and dangerous attention to yourself. Yeah. Well, suddenly Bone Cruncher, the red cap, enters the scene because he heard what was going on, and you got the big bad of the fight right now. So it was kind of like that. It's like as they deviated, I kept giving them juicy nuggets that kind of led them in a direction, but they made the choice of which path they went. And then I thought they were going to go straight to Oberon, King of Fairy, and cross through the stone circle right off the bat. But no. They just hung out there for a little while, had a picnic, met a Fey Lost, and decided to take them back to town to try to help them remember who they used to be. Yeah. So I helped them do that, and then they went back to the forest and got them right back on track.
Yeah. Okay. So that's your off ramp then. So that's your off ramp, is basically the monster could just appear.
Yeah.
Right. They have to have figured out the weakness, because in Monster of the Week, you cannot kill the monster until you figured out its weakness and used it against them. They either will not die or come right back, or maybe come back in 6 months or 5 years, depending on the type of monster. But if you don't figure out their weakness to use it against them, the monster is not finished.
But the beauty of that,
so you can end a scenario without them winning.
I was going to say the beauty of that scenario is just that, because you can still win that fight and have absolutely lost the war, because you're done. You got to move on to the next city, and then your denouement is, and while you're in, now that you've moved on to Topeka, because you were dealing with this thing in Handfast,
right?
Michigan, is you hear that the creature's back, and you're like, "Damn, we failed."
Yeah, 6 months later, he's in another town. You know.
Yeah, and you're like, "Okay,"
wrecking people
and
again.
and so again, satisfying game. You did the thing. They thought they won, but they realized they didn't quite get it. Now, the next time we hit Dayton, they can come back and do it again if that's how it went down.
In fact, in the crit show, one of the things that they did in one of their storylines is the guys fought, and this wasn't even aired, unfortunately. So I've never heard this episode because it was done at a con and they had audio problems, so it was never released. But they fought basically a big bug man that made like fist-sized mosquitoes that lodged into the back of your neck and took over your mind. And they saved all the civilians and they technically won the mission, but the big bad got away.
Yeah.
So I did get to hear the one later where the mosquito dude had set up shop again and they had to come back after him. Because he's still out there and he's still, he could take a specific, you could have him take a specific interest in the characters and hunt them directly. There's lots of ways that you can take that juicy nugget of plot and twist it to come back to haunt them later.
So
I'm sensing like a weekly world news monster of the week game.
Yeah,
could be hot. Anyway,
to put a finer point on it, with that game or with games that are extremely open avenue, such as Powered by the Apocalypse or much more narrative games, perhaps even a Star Trek, depending on how you construct it. The answer is just make sure your end goal is something that's movable within your story. So you are either generally doing one of two things when you're running a game at a convention. You are running a boxed adventure, however you may manipulate it, or you're running something homebrew. If you're running something homebrew, you make your own story and you can make that ending movable.
Yeah.
So you can have your monster decide, okay, they've done enough that the monster knows somebody's coming after them, and we've got an hour left. That's just enough time for me to have this boss battle. So now the boss goes to them. They didn't get through all the clues. They didn't do all of the things, but the boss knows that they're afterwards. Part of that construction and part of what you need to do at the table is make sure you offer narrative bites that lets you, that when you're done, it doesn't necessarily tell the players that they're being watched, but you got to give those foreshadowing moments so that at the end, when the boss shows up, they're like, oh, he was watching us all along. And it might be as simple as the guy with the cabbage cart shows up and you see it, like all of a sudden it's like when that threat roll is made and the big boss shows up, you see the guy with the cabbage carts, there they are, boss, and then that guy runs away, right? That is enough, because if you made a point of having that cabbage guy in each of those earlier scenes, they're like, that guy.
Right. It was laid throughout and then connect all those dots backward.
Yeah. The key. You got to give those foreshadowing moments.
And Lee is a master of that. Like I played in a game where he had an NPC that didn't show up until midway through the campaign. That was in the first game.
God. Yeah. Frustratingly good at that.
Yeah.
And to use an example of a situation that is frustratingly bad at that, I'm going to go into video games for just a second. Skyrim, when you first enter the town of Markarth, and the very first thing that happens, you walk through the gate. It's like, oh, you're at Markarth for the first time. Now you can fast travel here. The very first thing that happens is that there's a woman behind a cart that's like 10 feet in front of you, and she just gets killed.
Right.
Like done.
Dude, you can just walk away though.
Yeah. It's like, who the hell even is who? And then you get a quest. Find out who killed so-and-so. It's like, why would I give a crap who killed so?
Because you're a hero, Josh. Because you're a hero.
I mean, and beware at conventions
the best anti-hero
of forced. You want to do this,
right?
Like if you don't write that into a backstory, like you're the kind of guy that did this and this, and you can write pre-gens or select pre-gens from a list of existing ones and then write a little backstory. You came to this town because you wanted to do X, Y, or Z. And as long as you have your varied amount of pre-gens and have their own versions of that, then you're okay to do something like that. But if you go into a game where that's just so-and-so got killed, by the way, this is the only mission on the menu board of things to do, everybody sees through that. Like you'll likely have players at a convention who are like, I'm just here to play this game. I realize that's crap. Oh, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And what you'll do is you'll have people who have fun doing the game, but that game stops being memorable. And for most of us who are running games at conventions, whether we're doing it from a business standpoint, we want people to be purchasing our products, purchasing our games. We're doing it. We want people to listen to our additional content on air. Thank you all. Or it's just you love running games. You want people to say,
and you want to support the hobby and
I love that. Like I remember that moment. when Glenn's talking about that home game that I did, that was actually a convention game. So I will actually talk about that. I have a game world that I've been playing that I built. I had been running it at home version for some really close friends. The game I was running was myself, my youngest. We started this when he was like 12 or 13. He's 17 now, so
Barstock Chronicles.
We started it. We sent it 2 years before pandemic, so we've been at it for a minute. It's one of my older friends. I've known him since I was in the Army. So, in my 20s, he was my battle buddy. His two kids played, one a couple years older than mine and one the same age as mine. So it was designed as a family game. Glenn and his wife played at times, but we played that game for a while. I was going to a local convention that during the pandemic was doing just virtual. They had gone completely virtual. It's called Drinking and Dragons. We talk about it all the time on the show. It's a very fun convention. If you're in New England, I strongly recommend going.
Yeah, 3 times a year.
They are no longer virtual. They only do live now that we're post-pandemic, which is I love you guys.
I know,
please do virtual. So many people listen to our show that want to be a part of your event. If you allowed at least 1 or 2 virtual DMs, like we know some folks in Dayton, Ohio, I'm betting would love to run a game for you. But at any rate, what we found, what I wanted to do was do a game in that world because my group was going in their directions, and I really wanted to detail this northern section of my campaign world. So I did a one-shot, and it was a simple mission. It was a caravan got lost. You're hired to go find out what happened to this caravan and bring back any survivors. Simple. 3-day check into the mountain. Oh, by the way, there's a big, massive storm coming. Be careful. The enemy nation that we don't get along with is bordering to the west. That's the plot. I mean, it is really boring from a plot standpoint. It is so token. It has been in 15 billion novels. It has been in 15 billion different shows. What I did to make that different is I have a game world that has some very unique features, and I personally created the pre-gens. And I created each of the pre-gens with a specific backstory. So every pre-gen character had a tie to another character. I then did some, and then in that process, I created a lot of pre-gens. I didn't create 6 because I have a table of 6. I didn't create 8 because I had a table of 6. I created like 20. And then I did little backgrounds for each of them and then let people pick them. So the way people picked is they picked what they wanted. Not every character necessarily had a tie to one of the characters that was also picked. By accident, 3 of them did. That was enough. I started the scenario in a place that the mission was already accepted. I didn't say, you go to a tavern, there's a mission, will you take the job? It started with, you have all accepted this job. You have accepted the payment, taking money off the table. There's no, what is it really worth it? I didn't have any negotiation about that.
Right.
I started beyond that point. The job has been taken. You're only here to get the details of when you leave and get set up. I then went to a gear up session where, because it's northern stuff and I like resource economy. So and that was my bit to watch their role play. So they go in, I set the scene and I describe all the people in the bar, and one of the bad guys was one of the people in the bar. And I described him. I gave him a nice little voice, and he said a couple things, and I made sure his description was very clear. Very clear. And then they did that. They did their gear up. They did that mission. They started on the mission. We had a great time. This group really role played well. Went a bit long for time. So I was learning lessons back at this time. This was several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what I decided when we got short, because we were quite a bit far, I got to a good break point. It was a satisfying break point. They had gone through several encounters, 2 combats. They were really happy about what was going on. I said, how about we just make sure, I said, I can fast play this and we can go through it, or we can just set up time where we'll get together at a later point in a couple of weeks and we'll just finish the rest of it. They're like, oh, we all want to play. Did the next one. And then I was like, I really had a good time. Let me ask y'all a question. How would y'all like to just keep playing this game?
And they're still part of
the game. Here we are 4 years later. These characters they started end of first tier. They're now 17, 18 levels in that age. We're still playing, and we're getting ready to, we're starting to do the setup for the next campaign stuff. But the key for doing that was that pre-gen. We talk about a lot of things. I'm telling you, when you do a convention game, the quality of your pre-gens, the ability for a player to engage with the pre-gen mirrors their ability to engage with your game.
Yeah.
There's some mechanical things, and we'll get into that next, but that you'll have to do to get that game engagement. The system you use, curating the type of people, your elevator pitch to get people to your table, to sign up for your table, all those things need to be really on point so you get the right people at your table, right? But once you have them at your table, you've got to get them engaged and you've got to keep them engaged. And I do that personally with NPC characters. I tend to do some voices, not a lot. Some are great, some are pretty poor. But it is always for me about how I describe things. I'm really good at a tavern scene about describing the menu. On my phone, this one right here, I have 2 or 3 different crazy little apps that are just about a menu. So I can go when they say, okay, I will have a server come up and I'll have the server of blah, blah, blah species. And sometimes they'll, I might randomly I'll just roll a D20 and that's how good they look or how bad they look. And I can lean into that, and I, on the fly, whatever I feel the group is like in for, do they seem more comical? Do they seem they want to play a more serious game? And I just kind of lean into where they're going. That's why it's very key, like I said earlier, to pay attention to when they're selecting. Start a conversation when they sit down. Plan your session with a good 15 minutes at the table for picking pre-gens, starting conversations, hand out lollipops, hand out stickers, ask where people are from. The folks who are actually here in the room are realizing that these are the things that I actually did prior to setting up, right? Cut some jokes with your buddies who are at the tables next to you who are running games also. These are some things that you do, and watch their reactions. That'll tell you the kind of humor that they're into. It'll tell you the kind of action that they're into. Talk about some movies. What's the latest show that they really liked? If they start talking about Fringe or the Exorcist movie that they caught last week, they're going to be into a kind of game that's going to be a little darker, a little more direct, a little more narrative. If they're talking about, hey man, I watched Big Bang Theory last night and it was a riot and we're having a blast. We're geeks. We all like all of that stuff. Let's be honest.
Let's geek out. It's okay.
But if they're talking about it in that moment, that's your grab. That's your grab.
And all of that,
you have to pay attention to those things, those observation skills. That's really important to build and keep that engagement.
And all that brings up a really great perspective that we hadn't actually specifically discussed about the difference between an at-home game and a con game. That I think that now's a great time to point out that for a convention game, your player awareness, reading your group and watching what they're responding to and what they're not responding to, that game, your game there needs to be on point. Because if you're playing with the guys you've always known, you're already going to write story content that's going to fit their humor, that's going to fit their play style, and they're just going to jam with it most of the time. You still got to watch them just in case, you throw out one that goes flat. But when you're playing with a bunch of people you don't know, I mean, you have no idea what the senses of humor at the table are. You have no idea what pop culture they're into. So you really have to be watching them. Because if you're running a game that's definitely leaning in the comedy, but you get a group of people that are all about the serious epic role play tale, you're going to have to pivot, and you're going to have to keep them engaged by telling the kind of story they want to play.
Even just kind of awareness at the table kind of has to be a little bit even more on point. Like I noticed when I was running my game that just kind of the way that the table had set down and the way that I was sitting, that there was a player off to my right who was sitting further away from the table from everybody else. And so I kind of found myself addressing the 4 people that were within my range of shot, my range of vision, and not the 5th person. And so it was really just kind of a subtle change where I just kind of scooted my chair back about 8 inches, and it opened up my vision. And then all of a sudden that player was super engaged. And I realized like, okay, they're not in. How do I get them in? Because, you got to get them in. You got to get them in. Right. And the other thing that I wanted to go ahead and say is that, so I see our friends from Bud Stuff here. When we were running We Can Be Heroes earlier, what was awesome was the way.
Let me cut you off here. We Can Be Heroes, awesome game. Not just because you're here live, but also because we absolutely had a tremendous blast.
Really a lot of fun.
Like if there was another couple hours, I would say throw us a couple other characters. Let me play again because I had friggin' fun.
That was a blast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
and
that.
we're very happy. Like I said, we'll be talking about having you on the show in a more official capacity later. But
audience, you will hear from these guys again. Gay Runty.
What I wanted to say more specifically, though, was that the characters that you brought were diverse enough to be fun that none of us really had any kind of overlap, either thematically or mechanically. And so I know that, and I know that it's a little bit different because that wasn't really a con game. It's more of like a play test still, right? You're still kind of like working out the rules and everything like that. So the kind
the
of
party balance was on point.
Are a little bit different. Maybe not rules, but kind of the way you have to approach the problem is a little bit different. But that kudos to you guys for taking characters that were so diverse to make a successful playtest, because we have played the playtest game before and it is the devil. Hard, right?
Really
to go ahead
hard.
and make sure that you get enough of a sample out there, but also that like I didn't feel like like you and I could both do ranged things, but
they were very different.
They were very different. And you and I could both do like I can travel really fast things, but they were different, and we would use them in different ways. You know,
actually travel faster. I just teleported instead of walked, so it looked easy.
But the other player who actually sat at my STA table Friday, he could do some close things. My character had the ability to do close things, but they were vastly different in application and effect as well. So it was a great example. So in a homebrew setting, you need to write for that. Think about that when you're selecting and or creating your pregens, or play a game where the narrative can alter based on what you get. So STA is a great example of a game where it is easily malleable regardless of what roles are played. So with my particular game, and I did mine as a learn to play, I did a similar thing. I didn't just use the stock pregens that come with the starter set. That they were an option. I have taken the time to curate a much larger list. I took every role in the game. There's several, helm, which is con, you have security, you have science, you have medical, and command, right? So I took every one of those roles, did a human for each of those, and then I took those same roles and did a non-human species for every one of those. And then I did 2 or 3 non-federation characters as well. So there's this nice smattering. But the beauty of the STA game is if I had all security, because it could have had 3 people who took all security. Now, when I go through that narrative, I set it up as more of a conflict scenario where it's designed to be about the security operations. I would probably have an NPC be the pilot just to get that out of the way. But then
I
these
made the
guys,
same choice actually with my STA game.
and now it is about the security guys, their mission, and I would alter the book text because I did a book mission, but I would alter it to be your job is to go in and secure the site.
I always alter it. Like my Monster of the Week game, I build as my version of Dream Away the Time.
That's the key. If I have all medical people, it is my NPC now. I would just have one of them fly because anybody can fly a shuttle, right? But now I would have my NPC be one security person whose job it is to get them to the spot. And I would probably be looking for a complication that knocks that security guy out. So now the medical people have to get to the science facility to save the people at the science facility, and now their security guy who's out and dead weight, literally or figuratively, around them. So you can manipulate those things within the game. Now, there are some games
before you
that's
too far down
harder.
the field. Actually, I want to go ahead and drill on something that you just said. So, because you and I made the same choice, and we did not have this conversation ahead of time, but we both made the same choice, and it's both of us used a pilot, and both of us made the NPC a pilot. Why? Like, I know why I did it, but why did you?
So I didn't have to because I had a player do it, but I have run the mission I ran 4 times this year. And in one of those scenarios, nobody picked the pilot. So I had the NPC be the pilot.
Yeah.
And the scenario starts with a crash land. Like you have some things you can do, but the ship is crashing. There's nothing you can do. You start with that narrative. Again, start beyond the point that's going to hang you up. So you're not in that time. The literary term is start en media res. There's the Latin on that, right? And the idea being start in the middle of the action, so you can fall down. non sequitur at
Non
this
sec- yeah.
non sequitur at this
Yeah.
point. Fox TV does this a lot badly.
Yeah.
Fox TV famously
Probably
takes
wondering how I
any
got here.
show that's going to be a great show, airs them out of order because they want to start in media res. So they'll air episode 2 first, and now episode 1 doesn't make any sense. Two things.
That's what killed Firefly.
That's what killed Firefly. That's what killed Space Above and Beyond, and it has killed a number of shows in all kinds of genres on Fox.
That's not what. Okay.
There were a
We're not
number of
gonna-
things that killed Firefly.
we're not gonna
but
go
the
down
first 3
to what
episodes
killed
were aired
yeah.
out of order, and they didn't make any sense when it was
But
put on primetime.
my point is, if you're going to do a show very similar to doing a con game,
It's also because he was more
write
an
it
angel at
so
the time
you
and couldn't
start
divide himself
making
between both
media
projects.
res. That's slower to get people engaged in the game. Start with the action so you roll into it.
And the guys over there at Bud Stuff who did We Can Be Heroes for us today. I mean, especially they were running a playtesty combat scenario, but that worked perfectly. We sat down, we knew exactly what was going on. They laid out the scenario, and we were in it.
And we're in.
Your heroes, you have to
Perfect
save the
for the
innocent
time.
victim. Go. Like
Bunch of victims right here. You've got this number of assailants that you can see. Your job is to save the city. They gave us a great elevator pitch, to set up the town and set up the scenario where it's like you have. I'm going to try to do my best. I don't have your call sheet with me, but it was your scenarios. You're in the city, steam yard. Steamland is the name of the city. The police are paid to look the other way. Crime is rampant in certain areas. This is in the warehouse district, and they're go.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's there. It's like, okay, and CC Dodger, that's the character I played. You're up first, and my character's got a bat with ranged attack, and I'm like, send the heat. and we're at it. So you want to think about that.
Bunch of henchmen. Two big bosses, one called Big Galoot, the other one called B Flat.
Yeah, eventually. Don't give away all the secrets. And no one's hitting it the way TTJ hit it. I will say that. Like that was the thing. But the Rescue at Xerxes 4, which is the starter adventure that's in the core book for STA, is fantastic because it starts with the shuttle already crashing, like I just said, and you're in media res and you go. Similarly, if you take the starter box set, it has a series of 3 adventures that are campaigns, so it's mini campaign style, that are very well linked to one of my favorite TNG episodes. But that starts pretty close to in media res. You're on a ship, the mission has already been given. Here you are. Go. When I did an Eberron campaign at a previous Drinking and Dragons, when they first came back from pandemic, we were actually still wearing masks, still having to show our cards, all that stuff. I did a Midnight Train to the Mournlands, a homebrew adventure that I was writing. It's not been published yet. There's still some things. It's Eberron setting, but I did a similar thing. You're already on the train. All my NPCs belonged to different houses or had different roles. They knew the houses. And the idea is the players were hired to protect this couple that was going to this place. And they had this Romeo-Juliet thing, but they were hired to protect the couple, knowing that both families were out to get them on the train and go. And so they started, train's already rolling. The families that are out to get you. You got to keep this couple of young lovers from, 1, being young lovers, and 2, getting in trouble for being young lovers. So that's your mission. Protect them, and you're gone. And it didn't take long. There's some role play. I wrote some of the NPCs. A couple of the NPCs are loyal. A couple of the NPCs have history that they didn't like the couple, but they were hired and they would do their jobs. And so there was a little bit of that. Got a little bit of role play, but the train was rolling, and in comes the attack, and just started with it and go. And I think that's the way to do it.
Yep. Hit the ground running at a convention is how we could sum that up.
Yep.
Write your story to hit the ground running so that your players can't get bogged down in a tea party in the carriage on the way to Candlekeep because you don't have time for that.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was a phenomenal role-playing moment in an AP where we had time for it. But at a convention, if you give them the room to turn their introductions into 2 hours of role play, you're not going to finish.
So what's funny about the shuttlecraft scene? First of all, thank you. I appreciate you for saying that, for kind of like talking through what your thought process was on that. Because with mine, I had every intention of just kind of beaming them over to the ship. They were on ship A. They were going to ship B. They have teleporters. Why would they use any other technology other than the automatic?
They are called transporters.
What's that?
They are not teleporters, Josh. They're called
tall guy.
transporters.
Whatever.
Point tall guy.
The molecular disassembler high bandwidth through port.
I was worried you were going to say discombobulator because that's no good. You can't put them back
No,
together after
sorry.
that because recombobulate, combobulate, uncombobulate, none of the rest of those are a word. Only discombobulate.
Discombobulator 3.
In any case, I figured that they were going to teleport from one ship to the other because if you have
Beam one ship to the other. Beam. Do you watch Star Trek?
Yes, I watched Star
To
Trek.
be fair, 3/4 of this is just going to be the blooper episode.
All right,
So,
well,
I invite
finish
you
the
all
story,
to
but I
watch the
apologize.
finished product because there's going to be some bloopers. Well, we have a question, right? Did you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Facilitate work, not facilitate our ability to run kind of a time, particularly the time constraint.
Absolutely.
So before we dive, let me just go ahead and make sure that it gets picked up on audio. So friend of the show, Jack Vincent, asked if we talk about what we can do as storytellers to go ahead and do to set up con games. Are there things that designers can build into their missions to make con games easier to facilitate?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would say number one, create a starter adventure in every one of your core books and products.
Yeah.
It's designed to teach the game.
Designed to teach the
Don't
game.
make us do that work.
Don't
for how
make
to teach
us
your
do
game.
it. Make the play do that work for you. This is what Star Trek Starter Mission Beyond the Stars, the
Star Trek's great for that.
mission is
Teach
amazing,
players
and the
the
mission at Xerxes does. The very first challenge you make is a simple challenge. The core mechanic of the entire game is the first event you do. The next one comes right after that, which is a slightly more complicated, and then further from there. So you are in the course of this adventure going to hit every one of the mechanics in the game, but you don't hit them all up front.
Or at least you hit all of the main mechanics.
Yeah,
if you've got some obscure rules like falling rules in D&D, you don't fall that often. You could skip that one in the learn to play,
right?
but hit all of them.
You don't necessarily have to do ship to ship combat as far as if you're doing a fantasy role playing game, unless that's the core of your game. So you focus on the core rules in your core product. Do that. The next thing that I think that game companies can do, whether they be large or independent, is at least once a year put out a new early starter adventure.
New version.
I am not saying don't create higher level play, but put out some new kind of starter adventure, because one of the things that I think is very important is other game masters who love your game will want to get other players to play your game. The consistent complaint among GMs is, I want to play a new game, but I can't find anybody to do it. The reason that happens is there's not enough starter adventures to make that worthwhile.
The reason they do that is that they don't start a podcast to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, that's what we did. We wanted to find other players. We just started a podcast. That's a little tough, and we can't handle that much competition. No, I'm just saying. So one of the problems with 5e is it only had Lost Mines of Phandelver. It took them how many years before they did Stormwreck? And that's actually in advance. It's not necessarily the same level per se. It's different. And then they did another follow-up. What they needed to do is every couple of years, let's do a starter one. Now, a lot of their campaign modules or campaign books are start at low levels, but that's not good convention play because it's a campaign starter. But a simple module, like almost going back to that old school where we're talking about a lower price point, it's a little simple thing, or maybe it's just a PDF on DM's Guild or drive-through, is really what you need to get people going. So I think having a consistent refresh of those things is important. I know I've been running Star Trek for a year now, and I've run Xerxes mission at every convention I went to. I've gone to 5. By the end of the year, I'll be at did I say 6 or 7? 6.
No, four already.
4 already. I'll be 5 by the end of the
I
year.
haven't played in one of them. It is fun.
So one of the things I'm going to do next year is I'm going to find another mission that's convention ready. And if there isn't, I'm going to have to write it.
Right.
So my next 2 months is planning the adventure I run for the next convention. I recommend lower level stuff because you want players to play. And at conventions, you are always likely to get at least 1 or 2 people who are new to the game. If you're running a game that's not 5e or 5e based, assume you're going to get players who are new to the game, and always consider running a a learn to play version. So I ran mine as a learn to play. His was more of an advanced kind of getting started. And I think that's really the key. And I want to make sure that that anybody who's watching this really has that in mind, especially content creators, as you go, just a little something. Doesn't have to be fully involved. It might be not much more than what we did, maybe a little more dressing on the end of the scenario, because we were doing a play test, but that's a brilliant play test. So maybe write the startup and the lead up to that, or the follow-up. Maybe the whole game starts with that scenario. Excellent idea. Follow that with, now what happens to Anton? Or Anton really likes it, so he wants his supers to go there.
Okay.
So he offers a really good discount at my shop because you're so kind, and you stopped that one from hitting the glass. And I don't know why I went from an Italian guy to Vlad, but I'm taking it, right? It was good.
Happens. Everything I do turns Scottish.
It's wonderful, but like I said, I do voices. Some not so great. That was one of those not so great. Bud Stuff guys, he does a great Anton. But
Mario, yeah, he names in Tom.
He's Mario's cousin. But
you could be like,
and again, I went
Mario.
Circle. I don't know why I'm stuck on that. I'm gonna have to watch Dracula again soon. But no, but my point is, dressing that up so it's a little bit more, because that was a really good hour or so of play, hour and a half. I think we did about an hour and a half, because we were doing a lot of rules learning, which is perfect for a learn to play. Adding that other piece to follow up, like who sent the big bags to capture those people?
Yeah.
Or now maybe you get some kind of evidence, like now have them search for the evidence and find out one of those people was not actually a hostage. They were actually trying to get something from one of the other ones, so they staged their own capture so it wouldn't look on them.
Thankfully, we did not need to go ahead and check any of the bad guys for evidence, because you put them all into the dirt.
Yeah,
like literally.
Yeah, like we were, by the way, the guys at TTJ, we saved the hostages, but we would have failed any investigation because there was nobody left. We were rough.
Hey, we left the big galoot above ground. Somebody to turn over to the cops.
Like Frank Castle would have been proud of this team. The Steamrollers are all in. Right?
I was like, right off the bat, they're like,
that's the kind
dark
of
heroes.
So you've already got the heavy lifting as far as the big encounter to get you started. You do that investigation piece, you get a little role-playing piece, and then you just throw in now we get to the person who's really behind it, and now you've got a perfect, good 3-4 hour block adventure, which is perfect at conventions. So, and honestly, that's how I structure my homebrew things. I think about, generally speaking, a 3-act structure. There's not too much in any one act, and I do kind of let it flow. Like Glenn said, if I want a lot of options in that second act, I will let them pick any one of those things, but they're going to get core information out of each of those things. And the idea being, let the players decide which of those things they're going to have the most fun with. So they want to go a route, let them go that route. So you may have to do some work. You might be building 4 different encounters. One may be exploration, one may be conflict, one may be traps or puzzles, one may be some other thing. Mm-hmm. And I just mixed a whole bunch of different genres on purpose, right?
No, but that's actually perfect.
You pick all of those things, and then your players at the table will decide what they do, because that's what's fun for the table. Yeah. They go do that. The evidence they get or whatever they score at the end of that leads them to that final conflict. And then you do that final conflict based on whatever your game system is. And like Glenn said, if you're running short on time, bring the big bad to them. Yeah, make it happen. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, you mixed a bunch of different genres, but that's exactly what I did with my STA mission. So the STA mission began with, again, kind of like dungeon crawl. So there's your exploration stuff. You're trying to figure stuff out. Then began with a combat where like a security team from the bad guys was sent to them. So they had to go ahead and fight their way through that. The next thing that's happened is that that's when I pulled the reversal, and they basically failed their combat, were brought before the big bad, who monologued like big bads do, right? And then they were presented with a puzzle, and they had to go ahead and figure out how to get out of the puzzle. Yep. And once they got out of the puzzle, there was the success, but it's also, I also had to do the same thing that you did, where like the game was running too long, and so the mountain wasn't going to Muhammad, so I had to bring Muhammad to the mountain, right? And say like, cool, you have not found the big bad yet? Tell you what, the big bad brings you to her. And that's
on the upside. I didn't have to do that. I had it ready, but they made it to the big bad in time to fight him.
Yeah.
And everything worked out well enough that I just gave a summary of some of the wrap up afterwards that they could have played through and had fun with. We just didn't have time.
Aftercare.
The original with the question, the question of, can designers do more to help us teach these games?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that all of that summed up into an answer is yes. And you should have this many scenarios in your opening adventure because you need to teach your full game.
Yeah.
So you need the exploration piece so that you can play with the skills and the concepts and the role-playing aspects of the characters you've created. You need some skill checks so they can learn the skill check system. You need some role-playing encounters that are heavy on that. And you need a combat encounter or two at least. Small one first to get to get your feet wet, and then separate it for a little bit, put something else in the middle, throw on a bigger one at the end. You need to take all of the pieces of your rules and showcase them in your opening adventure, or at least your major rules
In
sets.
digestible chunks.
And digestible chunks. And we'll do it. If we're into your game enough and we get sucked into the concepts and we love it and our juices start flowing and our minds are firing, we'll do it for you.
Take it and run.
We'll master the rules if we like it enough.
Yeah.
And then we'll build something to teach the players that we're doing, but only if we like your game enough.
We need the cheese plate first.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is also cool and it came up is a bit of aftercare as far as your games go. So when I ran the STA mission, I ran the Xerxes one yesterday. One of the things that I did was I ran the first act pretty much exactly as written. Alter for the table based on the people who were playing. I ran the second encounter within that first act, the whole first act, which is 2 basic scenes, right? An intro and then an opening encounter. Pretty much straight by the book, straightforward. The second act is the one where in the Xerxes mission, there are 3 separate things that players go through. And the idea in the written adventure is they go through all 3. It's 3 separate encounters on the way to that science station. One of the things I've learned about running this adventure so many times is, depending on how fast we get rolling, how well people know the system, the learn to play elements can make that first act go a bit longer. And when I look at that, when I get to each act, at the end of each act, I do check the time. That is not out of boredom. That is not because I want to run. That's out of good game maintenance, right? I check the time. I know how much time I have. And I'm like, okay, I want to do the whole final act. The second act has the best ability to be challenging. So then I decided that I was only going to run one of the 3 encounters in the travel portion. I picked based on the types of characters I had, which ones they are going to have the most fun with, not necessarily be most successful with, not necessarily fail at, but the ones they're going to have the most fun with based on what I'm reading. So again,
and that's what I meant by off ramps.
Skills.
Yeah.
I then selected, in my case, the ravine one. There's 2 others that are really good. And I have run this where I played all 3. But I found that with this group, it was going to work best with that. We ran the ravine. They had a blast. A lot of cool things happened. Then I got to the final act, and I was able to do the final act pretty much verbatim. There was a little time crunch somewhere around there. And then it was just reordering a couple rooms, as opposed to making entirely a search through the facility. I pre-led, there's a noise in one room, you know where that room is, and they're like, well, we want to check this, we want to check that. They're all after the room where the sound is coming from. I'm like, okay, so we'll check the sound first. That's all I did. I never told them they couldn't. I just told them where the rooms were. Because it's a game I was running through the mind, I didn't have to worry about a map being there. So I didn't have to worry about where it is. So be aware, if you're using maps or map tools at these convention games, that can make that kind of thing harder. Right. So if you're doing theater of the mind, you can change the order of where things are encountered to allow the game to advance the way you need it to. So they were still able to do all those other things, but they hit the things that they needed to hit first. And then they went from there. And then I was able to run the entire rest of it the exact way. I was able to get out in the proper amount of time for the adventure in my time slot. We finished at like 5:20 that day. It was booked till 5:30.
Nice.
That's
and when you can finish
pretty
up that
good.
perfectly, that's pretty hot.
That's pretty hot.
Yeah. Quick shout out to one of our fans at home who's watching on our live stream, BK Dan, one of our regular fans and Patreons. He's got great commentary coming in from the side, agreeing, pacing is
a thing. Yeah.
And role playing doesn't stop when initiative is rolled. All of that should be part of the game. So yeah, thanks for your input,
Absolutely.
BK Dan.
And I should also shout Dan is been around Tabletop Journeys for a long time. He actually plays. When I mentioned earlier about, I was talking with several folks about a fire. I don't know if I did that on this show or earlier at the convention. I was talking to somebody about a fire that took place in one of my games. His was the character that started that fire out, by the way. So it's kind of cool. He lit up a whole town. Yeah, he did. He did start the fire, flipped the whole table, the whole thing. And which led to some great role play. So we had a whole court case event after that.
So I have one more thing to add on how to make your con game better, just based on what you've been talking about and what I talked about, and connections happening and clicking in the brain. Something else to not be afraid of is pick your scenario. Like he's run Mission on to Xerxes how many times? 6 now?
Yeah.
Four or five. And I did some
Wait.
really good prep on the plane right here. Like I reread the entire thing really cleanly. Like it was actually, honestly, of all the times I've run it, I was probably better prepped for today's one. So I've gotten better each time I've done it. So if you are a content creator and you or you are a GM who goes to a lot of conventions, yeah, I'm gonna let Glenn go. I said I messed up.
You have the highest word quota of all of us. We understand. But I'll tie it up real quick, and then you can carry off with your riff on it. And for Monster of the Week, this was the first time yesterday that I ran this specific adventure. But my original plan was to play test it once beforehand. But again, I pivoted stories, and then I'm running the same one on Sunday, and then I'm running the same adventure for our Patreons. I won't have the same players in any group, but every time I run that story, I'm going to get better at it, and I'm going to be more prepared to pivot when it goes off the rails or doesn't go the direction I need it to. So with the convention games, you're not getting the same group of players all the time. Don't be afraid to run something you're super familiar with. Get familiar with it. Make it your convention game. If that gets boring, have 2 or 3 different ones that you pivot between. But that way you will always know your material when you sit down.
I want to point out the fact that BK Dan mentioned he can neither confirm nor deny he's started the fire. And I should also add, in the narrative of that game, he actually never got caught. Right. The fire started and it was blamed on the whole team. Nobody on the team saw him do it. And so
he's a dragonborn that spits fire.
But they were
Maybe you just sneezed.
Nobody survived the building that the fire got started in, so there was no evidence. And he also skinnied out of there, so a back way, so nobody ever knew he was in the building to begin with. So it's pretty good. But yeah, my riff was basically just going into like a really good read on the material allowed me to get better at it. Like Glenn said, I just kept doing it. Next year, I'm going to do a different one. I'm going to get better at it every time. If you're a game master and not a content creator, if you're just somebody who does this because you, for love of the game, God bless you. It's amazing. And thank you for it. We need more GMs who are going to all these cons and continuing to run games. But if that's you, you're going to go in, you're going to want to get good at running a given scenario. Don't run it till you're bored with it, but run it till you feel like I've done this as good as it's going to get. Like this is the pinnacle. And I think that's what I did yesterday. I had so much fun. I've had fun every time I did it. But I think yesterday, and that's not that anybody got short shifted. It's just that I hit all the marks. I finally 100% got the adventure. I got all of the engagement in all the different permutations the adventure's been run, and I'm ready to run another one to that level. Right. It's how you improve your skills as a GM. It's how you improve getting people to your tables. If you're running at games pretty consistently, going all to your local cons, occasionally flying out for another one. So you can see AcadeCon next November. We'd love to have you here because we're hoping to be back. You're going to get people willing to play at your table. Go to your shop and run a game. Even if the first 3 or 4 times there's only 2 people at your table. Every game shop I've ever been to doesn't have enough games being run there enough days of the week. Find a day, run a table.
It'll make your storytelling better.
You literally bring one person there and have some other people be there. By the time you get to a convention, I treat my days at my local store because I don't run my local games at my local store, but I do a lot of one-shots. So I will run the things I'm running at conventions at my local game shop. Stop at your local retailers like some of the ones we've met here and knock it out.
All right. Before he continues, we are actually at time, if you can believe it. We have said our piece. We have done our time. I wish that I could tell you what. When this episode comes out on the podcast channel, I wish that I could tell you what next week's episode is going to be, like I normally do, but I actually can't. My keyboard is way over there.
Right. You can't look at all the stuff and know what's up next.
So there will certainly be an episode. It's probably going to be
a good one too.
I think it's the
horror episode. Yeah.
So we recorded an episode on how to do a horror game originally for Halloween, and then we had an interview with a great content creator that we wanted to make sure we got in there while their Kickstarter was live. So we pivoted, so our Halloween episode's coming out a little bit later.
Yeah,
it is partially edited at this point. You'll hear that next Friday.
Yeah.
So before we close out, though, because we do have the three guys here from Bud Stuff, and we haven't straight up given a call for questions from the audience, but we did get one.
Yeah.
Before we close out, do you guys have any questions for us or anything that you think we may have forgotten about running a con?
Have we thrown information at you today?
A con game, because you guys are demoing a new game that you're still developing. You guys have anything to
add? We do that. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, praise where praise is due, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for running the game for us, because we had a blast.
We look forward to running your starter mission when you put that together. Because I saw y'all talking when we said that. You're like, oh.
We got our content information too. So if you want us to peruse anything for you as you're working on that, we'll be there to throw you some advice.
Three of us don't often get to play at a table, virtual or otherwise, together. Part of that is distance. Part of that is just time. We tend to be forever GMs.
We are forever GMs.
That's why we love the APs where people come in and run.
Yeah, Tabletop Journeys is typically running games, sometimes at the same time. The shirt I'm wearing today, Streams of Sphero, that is the one game that the three of us are currently able to play.
You need to shut up soon. I think we're about to get thrown out from the next room.
Providing us an opportunity to play at one table together. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for sticking around. Thank you everybody on the live stream for following us and for watching the show. Appreciate coming to you live. We'll talk to you all next week.
AcadeCon's been a blast. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.
Michael Ross and the team at 2020. Y'all are awesome.
Yep.
Love it. Can't wait to come back next year.
All right.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Peace.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around, guys.
Yeah.